Grammar Girl here. I'm Mignon Fogarty, your friendly guide to the English language. We talk about writing, history, rules, and other cool stuff. Today, we're going to talk about the earliest origins of American English and about tricky phrasal verbs. With July 4th celebrations looming, it's a good time to consider how the American Revolution affected the English language itself. After all, Noah Webster didn't take the U out of color and flavor just for the heck of it. He was making an important statement about the linguistic independence of a new nation. But before we get to Webster's validation of a separate American language, we have to go back a bit in time to understand how American English even developed into a different thing from British English. And for that, we need to go back to the beginning of colonial times. When British settlers first arrived in the New World, many indigenous languages were already spoken on its shores. Not only did early colonists encounter many of these languages for the first time, but they also encountered new places and new things, none of which had English names. So, to be able to have good colonial conversations about where they should live, what plants to eat, and what critters to be on the lookout for, they had to learn about them from the original inhabitants. For instance, many place names in colonial America were based on the names given them by Native Americans. In fact, more than half our modern states have names that are anglicized versions of Native American names. For instance, Massachusetts is derived from the Algonquin word Massachusetts, meaning something like Great Hills Place. Connecticut comes from the native word Connecticut, which translates roughly to a place along the river. Michigan comes from Algonquin Michigamow, which has been translated as Great Water or Big Lake. And how about the great state of Texas? Well, one long-standing theory is that it comes from the native Caddo word Taisha, meaning friend or ally, a word that was extended to a Spanish priest, Damian Massanet, who was sent to build a mission there. Massanet wrote the word down as Tejas, and a state name was born, though there is at least one historian who suggests the name instead comes from a native Spanish word for the yew tree. Beyond place names, colonial English borrowed a lot of new terms to describe objects or aspects that were new to them, but were part of Native American culture, like moccasin and tomahawk from Algonquin, papoose, squaw, and powwow from Narragansett, and teepee from Dakota. British settlers also came upon many new plants, foods, and animals in this new land. Since at least early on, Native Americans helped them learn about their new surroundings and often provided sustenance when the settlers were starving, it makes sense that the settlers used the native words for many of these things. For instance, colonists borrowed native Algonquin words for the raccoons, terrapins, opossums, moose, chipmunks, and woodchucks they encountered. Not to mention that they also borrowed the word skunk, perhaps after experiencing the unique, if malodorous, joy of unexpectedly running into one. Now, a couple of words borrowed from indigenous sources to describe native crops would end up becoming particularly important to colonial lifeways: maize and tobacco. Both came from an extinct Arawakan language known as Taino. Maize, which comes from the Taino word mahazawas, became a life-saving mainstay of the colonial diet, but the colonists referred to it not as maize, but as Indian corn. This title reflected not only who cultivated the crop in the New World, but was also an insult, as at least until colonists became hungry enough to eat it, maize was first considered worthy of only animals or savages. But why did they call it corn rather than maize? Well, back in Britain at the time, the word corn, which is derived from the German Korn, meant simply grain. It could be used to refer to any type of grain grown locally in an area, be it wheat, rye, or the newly discovered maize. Interestingly, if you ever wondered how the heck corn is involved in corned beef, it's through this sense of the word where corned beef comes by its name, as the corning process involves grains of salt. So, corned in this context meant beef with salt grains. The yellow-kerneled cob Americans refer to by the name corn today was probably not entirely new to the colonists. Christopher Columbus had brought maize back to Europe after discovering it during his travels in the Caribbean, where he described the Taino word as maíz, in other words, which became Spanish maize. But as the word corn was more generic and common, it was the one the colonists used, and over time, in America, it became semantically narrowed or limited to only referring to this one plant, with the Indian label eventually dropped as it became one of the foundational foods. Tobacco was another Taino word widely used by American colonists after they were introduced to its cultivation possibilities in the fertile soil of Virginia. Again, Columbus had brought tobacco leaves and seeds back to Europe after his travels, so it wasn't a completely new word. What was new, though, was the ability to grow it as a cash crop in large quantities, and it became a booming business in the Virginia colony. Tobacco cultivation and the intense need for workers to harvest it is unfortunately also what began the importation of enslaved labor to the colonies, with the first enslaved workers arriving as early as 1619. Slave ships brought not only people, but their West African languages as well, and this in turn contributed to the unique Southern American variety of English that developed in the plantation South. The languages of other European colonizers also ended up providing American English new terms for the New World. For example, after taking over the Dutch colony of New Netherland, which stood in what is present-day New York and New Jersey, named after the Duke of York and the Isle of Jersey, respectively, British colonists started to make use of Dutch words like cookie, cruller, Yankee, and most important of all, Santa Claus. Many of the street and neighborhood names in New York are also of Dutch origin. Today's Wall Street comes from Wallstraat, which in Dutch colonial times was literally a wall built to defend the colony against the English, which obviously didn't work out too well. The Queens neighborhood, known today as Flushing, came not from a celebration of the advent of indoor plumbing, but from English attempts to pronounce its Dutch name, Vlissingen, also the name of a town back in the Netherlands. This linguistic diversity was all part of what led the English of the British settlers in the New World to change and morph once on American shores. But it was the American Revolution that really gave American English the power to stand on its own. Prior to and shortly after the Revolutionary War, the British often bemoaned the new additions in American settlers' English, treating them as barbarisms or vulgarities. However, as the colonists found themselves united against the British crown and a new nation was born, they embraced and celebrated these differences. Several founding fathers, including George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, had deep conversations with Noah Webster about the need for a distinct American tongue to help reinforce the delicate union of the colonies. To that end, Webster published a wildly popular spelling book, introducing some of his Americanized spelling conventions, like the U-less color and humor, the reversal of RE to ER in center and theater, and dropping the extra L in words like canceled and traveled. A bit later, Webster also published the first dictionary based on American English, his American Dictionary of the English Language. While many of us know Webster because of his dictionary and spelling reforms, his political aims, that of uniting a fragile alliance of states and helping a new nation find its unique voice, is less well known. So the 4th of July celebrates much more than the establishment of a new republic. It also celebrates the linguistic diversity and power of innovation that came to shape the American language. That segment was written by Valerie Friedland, a professor of linguistics at the University of Nevada in Reno, and the author of Like Literally Dude, Arguing for the Good in Bad English. You can find her at valeriefriedland.com. English contains a bewildering number of so-called phrasal verbs, 2 or 3-word compounds that seem to consist of a verb and a preposition, things like bring up, fill in, give away, pay back, work out, and many more. The Oxford Phrasal Verbs Dictionary lists 6,000 of them in its 2016 edition. Native speakers of English learn these naturally in the course of language acquisition, though the diversity and intricacy of phrasal verbs makes them difficult for English speakers to analyze and explain. What is the difference between cleaning an office and cleaning up an office? Or writing something and writing up something? Well, if you clean an office, you're removing dirt, dust, and trash. If you clean up an office, you're making it orderly. To write something often implies starting at the beginning, while to write up something suggests some result or organization is already evident. Phrasal verbs aren't only semantically idiosyncratic, but grammatically complex as well. Grammatical descriptions of English can be helpful, but terminologically daunting. Some sources say phrasal verbs are made up of verbs plus prepositions, but other sources may refer to the second element as a particle, a somewhat vague grammatical term for a word that's uninflected and which forms part of another word. And most prepositions can also be used as adverbs: look up, call off, drop in. Are these verb plus preposition, verb plus particle, or verb plus adverb? Before you give up, let me offer a few tips to navigate the complexity of phrasal verbs. 1. Phrasal verbs are verbal idioms whose meanings are less predictable than their prepositional or adverbial counterparts. If we say that someone looked up the answer or dropped off a package, the meanings of up and off aren't literal in the way that they are in looked up the hill or dropped off the cliff. 2. Phrasal verbs often have formal synonyms. You can hand things out or distribute them, turn them in or submit them, set up or arrange, call off or cancel, go ahead or proceed, look into or investigate. If a two-word verb seems to have a more formal paraphrase, often from Latin or French, it may be a phrasal verb. 3. Phrasal verbs have a unique syntax in that they allow the particle to shift away from the verb and hop over a direct object when one is present. You can hand out the exams or hand the exams out. The separability, the hoppiness of the particle tells you that out the exams is not a prepositional phrase coming after the verb hand. 4. Syntactic tests can be tricky, though, since they're not completely exceptionless. If the direct object is a pronoun, then the particle must occur after it. The teacher handed out them isn't fluent English, but the teacher handed them out is just fine. 5. Another exception. If there is an indirect object, then a particle isn't permitted unless the indirect object is preceded by a preposition. So, the teacher handed the students out the exams is decidedly un-English. Well, the teacher handed the exams out to the students, or the teacher handed out the exams to the students, are both fine. 6. Another good test is to convert the sentence to passive voice. If the predicate contains a phrasal verb, then the direct object can shift to the subject position. We can say, the house was fixed up by the new owners, or the character was killed off by the writers. But the oddness of the trail was walked up by the hikers, or the horse was fallen off by the rider, suggests that up and off are more closely connected to the trail and the horse than to the verbs walked and fallen. You can double-check this another way, too. If you suspect something is a prepositional phrase rather than a particle plus noun, you may be able to shift the prepositional phrase to the front of the sentence. Up the trail the hikers walked, or off the horse the rider fell. Both of those are okay. But up the house the new owners fixed, or off the character the writers killed, those don't work at all. Less predictable meanings, more formal synonyms, particle hoppiness, and openness to the passive voice. Those 4 tests can help you decide when you're dealing with a phrasal verb. Try them out. Who knows what you'll turn up? That segment was written by Edwin L. Battistella, who taught linguistics and writing at Southern Oregon University in Ashland, where he served as a dean and interim provost. His books include Bad Language: Are Some Words Better Than Others?, Sorry About That: The Language of Public Apology, and Dangerous Crooked Scoundrels: Insulting the President, From Washington to Trump. It originally appeared on the OUP blog and is included here with permission. Before we get to the Familect, I have a quick note on the phrase, hair of the dog that bit you. A few episodes ago, we said this phrase comes from a 16th century belief that one should consume the hair of the offending dog as a remedy if you had the bad luck of encountering a rabid dog. And it's true that they believed that, but a listener named Tara Kiter also pointed me to a much older reference. It turns out the first known reference goes back to a city near modern-day Syria, where researchers found a text that dates back to at least 1200 BCE that describes treating a hangover with a salve that includes hairs of a dog. Thanks, Tara. Finally, I have a Familect story from Angela.
Hi, Grammar Girl. This is Angela from Salt Lake City, and I wanted to share with you our Familect, which is called Kaka Nuka. This is a word that actually developed over the years as the children in our family grew. It started with whenever there was something we didn't want a child to touch, such as an electrical socket or, the cat litter box, we would say yucky, no, no. And because it was hard for them to say the word yucky, they would say cookie. So they would say yucky, no, no, and they would repeat back cookie, no, no. So as they got older, they would say that to their younger siblings. They would say, kaka, no, no, kaka, no, no. And then as those kids grew up, it ended up getting shortened to kaka nuka. And so now that they're all grown up and adults, we just have this universal word for anything that we have an aversion to or that we dislike or we just find disgusting is a kaka nuka. So that's our family story.
Thanks so much, Angela. That was such a timely story because it's so reminiscent of the way we get so many other words from mishearings or not being able to pronounce them, like getting Connecticut from Quonnocticut. If you want to share your Familect, a word or phrase your family and only your family uses, call the voicemail line at 833-214-GIRL. Call from a nice, quiet place and be sure to tell me the story behind your Familect because that's always the best part. Finally, if you are an educator, have you checked out my free LinkedIn Learning courses at your university library? Or if you're not an educator, have you told a friend who is? I have short videos with transcripts about every major topic you'd want to teach your students. Commas, hyphens, dashes, commonly confused words, subject-verb agreement. It goes on and on. And did I mention they're often free through your library? So as you're thinking about your fall lesson plans, check out my courses and slot in some videos to make your teaching job easier. I'll put a link in the show notes, or you can go to my profile on LinkedIn where I have those posts pinned. Grammar Girl is a quick and dirty tips podcast. Thanks to Ad Operations Specialist Morgan Christensen, Digital Operations Specialist Holly Hutchings, Director of Podcasts Brandon Getchis, Marketing Associate Davina Tomlin, and Audio Engineer Nathan Sims, who's experimenting with hydroponic grown pickles, tomatoes, and peppers this summer. Yum. And I'm Mignon Fogarty, better known as Grammar Girl. Remember to look for Grammar Girl conversations in your feed. This Thursday, I have a special show because Thursday is episode 1000 of the podcast. Can you believe it? Episode 1000. I'll see you Thursday. That's all. Thanks for listening.